Start whenever you want.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the opening fall 2021 lecture sponsored by the Gene Winter Northeast chapter of the Mass Archaeological Society. We've been doing these through Zoom, and we'll probably continue to do them this fall via Zoom. Phillips Academy, which graciously supports us, just isn't ready to have us have open meetings at the Peabody Institute, but that's okay. I think we could reach more people this way. Before we start tonight's lecture, I just want to make a couple of announcements. First, if you're not subscribing to the Digging In series that the MAS itself sponsors with the Peabody, I encourage you to do so. There's a lecture tomorrow. It's Paulette Steves. She's a doctoral out of Binghamton, but she teaches in Canada. And she talks about the indigenous Paleolithic in North America, and it would be quite interesting. And she's quite well known and somewhat controversial, which also makes it even more interesting to me. The second item is that the chapter sponsors its annual Atlatl Day. This year we're doing Atlatl Days. So we just had one September 21st. We're going to have another one this Saturday, the 28th, at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead in Danvers, Massachusetts. We get a good number of people. It's fun because we try to have miniaturized atlatls for younger children to use, as well as we use regular arrows as the darts for smaller kids, so that the weight isn't an issue. But we get a
I
big
even
crowd.
armed my 3-year-old nephew with it, so everyone has fun.
And we have repeat children coming. I think there's one who's come, except for last year when we closed. This would have been her 3rd year or 4th year. And so her kids grew up coming there. So this is an anticipated event. Anyway, that's from 9 to 3 on Saturday. And we're always looking for volunteers. It's basically David McKenna, who is also the president of the Danvers Historical Society, but he's a member of our chapter and an MAS trustee. Myself, we're helped by John Rumpelakis this past Saturday. And Lindsay helped a bit, even though it was not just her nephew she was helping. So it was great. It's nice to get tips from people who really know what they're doing with the atlatls. So if anyone's interested to come and volunteer with us, that'd be wonderful. Plus it gives David and I a chance to break away and actually, see a man about a horse when we need to. But in any event, I guess we should get going with tonight's speaker. We were really fortunate that, excuse me for 1 second. Mark Doperalski, I think I pronounced that right, Mark. I hope I did. He's the state archaeologist for our neighboring state of New Hampshire. He graciously stepped in when our two speakers I thought we had commitments from had to back away. Mark has been a professional archaeologist for over 25 years. He's worked throughout the United States and actually abroad. He specializes now mostly with lithic technology, but he's worked the full range up to mill sites and trading posts. He worked on a pre-contact bison kill site. So he's got a wide background. I actually recently saw him on public television doing a rescue mission for a cemetery along one of the rivers in New Hampshire. So it's kind of cool to see the variety of things that people work on. With that, I think I'll turn the stage over to Mark, and Lindsay, take it away.
All right, I'll share my screen here real quick, just so someone can let me know if they see it.
Yes, and just so everyone knows, Mark can't show his video if he's doing sharing the presentation. So you're just going to kind of see his name for this.
All right, 1 second while I get this thing set up. All right, well, I have to thank everyone for attending tonight's presentation. It's been kind of a crazy past year and a half or so, but we've all persevered, and I appreciate everyone's flexibility in these trying times to actually be able to still carry these kind of presentations out and still get people that are interested in attending them. So today I want to talk a little bit about the archaeology that we have been doing up in Mollidgewock State Park, as well as a little bit more at the end. I want to talk a little bit more about the overall context of our survey work. kind of the bigger picture, if you will. So if you've never heard of Mollidgewock State Park, that's not a bad thing. I had never even known it existed until we were having a departmental land management team meeting, probably about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. And they were just talking about upcoming projects in what is known as the 13-mile woods community forest, way up north. And one of the areas that they showed was this state park. It's just one of the areas that happens to be along this 13-mile segment of the Androscoggin River. And I said, wow, that looks like a nice place. And if I'll show you the map here. And so that really looks like a place that would be good to go and do an archaeological investigation on. Seems to have a really good location where at the confluence of two streams. It's got a relatively flat land area. And if you look to the other side, the opposite sides of the river there, one side is largely wetland and the other side is really steep. So I was thinking, wow, this actually, this could be a good place to go and look for some Native American artifacts. And as you can see on the map, the location of it is way up in the far northern part of New Hampshire. So just a little bit of background on the state park itself. The park is about 46 acres up in the town of Errol, New Hampshire. And it began as a campground back in 1972 as part of the aforementioned 13-mile woods community area. It was taken on by the state in 1994. It now consists of 44 campgrounds, but campsites, I should say. The campground is really, I believe the word that most people would use would be primitive campsites. There is no electricity, there's no running water, so you have to bring in everything water-wise, and it's really not heavily developed at all. There are a few lean-tos that are built there, but the campsites largely consist of a fire ring. That's about it. They've really not developed the area at all, which is another good sign for archaeology. The campground is extremely popular for people that are using the river, mostly fishermen and kayakers. A lot of nice rapids there, and a kind of change of pace of the water between the slower, deeper areas and the faster, shallow areas. So it's usually pretty full. It's actually hard to even get a site up there in most years. So with all bad things, there's always, generally speaking, there's a silver lining. So the silver lining to COVID-19 for us was that this particular campground, due to COVID-19 and trying to kind of have a less amount of staff in the state parks, wherever this state park, it was decided that this one would be closed down last year. So we kind of had free range of the entire park as opposed to trying to have work around people that were camping or recreating at the park. So it was a good opportunity to get in there. So prior to the investigation in 2020, there were no archaeological sites, Native American or otherwise, that had been identified. And this is largely due to the lack of previous survey. Certainly not the lack of potential. As I had mentioned before, this area has very well drained soils. They seem to have formed on level surfaces. You can see here, can you see my mouse moving? Awesome. Yes. So right here you have Mollidgewock Brook flowing into the Androscoggin River. And just for a little bit of sizing, when you look at a map like this, I mean, you can look at the scale, but if you note the width of this brook that flows in, and then note the width of the campground road here. And this is a standard gravel road that you can drive your car and camper down. You can see that the brook is actually wider than that road. So this isn't just a little trickling stream. This is a pretty decent stream that's coming in and meeting the Androscoggin River here. You can also in the aerial see the rapids right here, and here. And this is a slower, deeper area coming into the rapids. So again, as I just noted, you're at the location of a confluence of two streams, which is generally a good sign if you're looking for Native American deposits. A relatively flat area, well-drained soils. Again, there's a campground there, but it's relatively undeveloped, very primitive sites. The close proximity to water would have offered a lot of plentiful plant and animal resources for subsistence. And based on Chester Price's research, we believe that this was also, the river was also used as a transportation corridor. And based on, again, Chester Price's research, there there may have been an overland trail that followed very closely or paralleled the river as well. So all in all, the area had a great potential for Native American archaeological resources. So armed with supplies and determination, we headed up north and set up camp. As I said, there was a few lean-tos which were completely unused because we had to run of the entire place. So it made for a nice little shelter for us, which is this is actually higher living than we're used to when we go out in the field. So we actually had a nice hard top shelter to set up our camp in, our camp kitchen, and we had otherwise we were just hanging out in tents and whatnot. Again, full run of the park, complimentary camping since there was no one that was using the park. We were able to stay there for free. All in all, pretty good for an archaeologist. We dug right in and got to work. You can see here two of our scrap team excavating a shovel test pit, and right here you see Mollidgewock Brook flowing into the Androscoggin River. One of the interesting things here is this is a very deep location. Water appears to move slowly through this until it hits the rapids where it looks like it's going really quickly. And the word Mollidgewock, the word Mollidgewock means at the deep water or at the deep place in Abenaki. So essentially it sounds like when early explorers were coming through here, they may have borrowed that word. It seems a fitting name at any rate to be applied to the state park these days. We did not work the entire time. We occasionally stopped to eat, enjoy each other's company. That's kind of the point of doing some of these excavations, in addition to trying to gain some information and gain data on past people, is to enjoy the people that are around us now too. So we definitely took time to enjoy each other's company. We also took time out of our busy schedule here to honor the beast, as we call it, this old 1994 pickup truck, Ford F-350, that had served us well for many years, but this was its last mission. So we all took time, took a crew picture with it, and kind of sent it on its way for its final mission. But getting to the archaeology, we excavated 51 shovel test pits, mostly at 8-meter intervals, but there were some that we excavated at 24-meter intervals, just to try and avoid some of the camping features, and it was a little less of a potential area to begin with. And then we excavated an additional 4 shovel test pits where we at 4-meter intervals where we had a positive. So on the map, if you look on the map there, the shovel test pits are represented by the purple dots, and we had we had 4 of the 51 shovel test pits that were excavated at 8-meter intervals were positive for Native American artifacts. And then there was also one of those test pits also contained a feature. So we bracketed that shovel test pit that had the feature in it with 4 additional shovel tests, again at 4-meter intervals, and 2 of those 4 bracketing shovel tests turned out to be positive for Native American artifacts as well. So just to discuss the feature a little bit, the feature was found in the shovel test right here, center dot, green dot here. And the feature essentially consists of a concentration of FCR, charcoal, calcined bone, and fire-reddened soils. And right at the top of it was a stone tool, which was crafted of a fine-grained gray to black chert material. Kind of looks like the stuff that comes out of New York, but we're not really positive on that yet. But at any rate, definitely a cool feature. Definitely something cool to find on it as part of a shovel test pit. This is kind of stuff that you get a couple positives and you come back and start opening up 1x1 meter units, hoping to find a feature. Well, we got this right up during the shovel testing. And a little bit of a funny story. I saw that George the Duke's on here in the audience, so he was there and witnessed it. But I actually laid out a series of flags along the transect marking the shovel tests, and I initially said, well, we'll just dig every other one on this transect, so we can kind of, it was a very quick investigation. We only had a few days up there, wanted to kind of make best use of time. And well, the top of the flag, I said, start at the first one and do every other one. The top of the flag, that marking what should have been the first shovel test in that line, the top of the flag, the plastic part, blew off the metal wire of the flag. So when the crew went down there, when a 2-person crew went down there, they went to what was the second shovel test on the line, thinking it was the first because the flag was missing. And that ended up being this test pit, which probably wouldn't have gotten dug if we were doing every other one going off first. So a little serendipity there. It was, I guess, good luck, but we'll take it. All right, so I mentioned that in the feature we had charcoal. We actually had really nice pieces of charcoal. You can see in the photograph there, some really nice solid charcoal chunks. And so we sent those off to Paleo Research Institute to both have a species analysis and get a date. The species came back as Acer rubrum, otherwise known as red maple. And the date came back as 200 plus or minus 15 radiocarbon years before present. Well, for anyone that has dealt with radiocarbon dating before, when you get within 300 years, things get a little goofy with the radiocarbon dates. And the reason for that is during the Industrial Revolution, which, you can argue when exactly it began, but, most people say 1760-ish, somewhere around there. That revolution really introduced, at a very large scale, a lot of CO2 derived from burning coal, oil, natural gas. And these carbon sources, of course, were millions of years old. And their carbon-14 had since decayed to nitrogen. And so the carbon dioxide basically doesn't have radiocarbon in it anymore. So you have this period of time where all of this carbon-14 free CO2 is going into the atmosphere and kind of messing with the radiocarbon activity that's being deposited. So essentially what that does is it messes up the whole relationship between a younger sample has a higher carbon-14. That relationship is messed up. So you end up having more recent samples appear older in the calendar date, and sometimes vice versa. But long story short, if you look at the table here, it shows the red area, I should say, is the radiocarbon date range of our sample, the 200 plus or minus 15 radiocarbon years before present. And the blue line shows the calendar ages that would be intercepted by this stage. And then you also see the data, the percentages for both sigma 1 and sigma 2. Based on that analysis, the most likely date coming out of that date range, I should say, would be about 1650 to 1800 AD. So the calibrated dates, in other words, would be 1650 to 1800. Remember, there was that stone biface in there as well. So is this a post-contact Native American feature? I don't know. At first, I was kind of bummed out. I was really hoping for something that, older, maybe in the archaic. But then I realized that it might be a really good opportunity to learn a little bit more about the continuity of Native American lifeways beyond the contact period and possibly well into the post-contact period. So, I mean, what can we learn about the continuity of indigenous lifeways from a site like this? What plant resources are being utilized? What animal resources are being utilized? And have the cultural traditions changed or not changed? And we're talking about a part of the state that was pretty far removed from the industrial centers and whatnot. Certainly there would have been contact with fur traders and folks like that. But maybe the lifeways up there of the Native Americans hadn't really changed that much. And maybe they were continuing to use a lot of their technologies, the technologies that existed before contact, hence the stone tool. So interestingly enough, I gave this same presentation last spring at the New Hampshire Archaeological Society meeting, and I was subsequently contacted by one of the Abenaki groups who noted that some of their people often frequented this area during the time period in question. And they suggested that I read Henry Tuft's autobiography. Henry Tuft is a gentleman. He was a criminal and a thief and a liar and everything else. But he lived from 1748 to 1831, and he recorded his entire life up to 1807. Mostly, of course, being that he was a liar and a profiteer and everything else, he talks a lot about, he probably exaggerated a lot of the things he did, but he does at a time in his life, he goes off and lives with the Native American group, and he describes in pretty good detail just the living conditions, what they were doing. He talks about them going up and down the Androscoggin River. So I of course got the book, read it because it's a good primary source material, or it is a good primary source on some of the indigenous lifeways that were going on during that time. And of course, I went straight to the chapters about the Native American, his time with the Native Americans. But the book was so interesting. I ended up reading the whole thing. If any of you, and I'm sure you all do, have a great interest in just the history of New England in general, it's a really cool perspective, this book is, because he talks about all the little misadventures he had through a lot of towns that you'll recognize throughout Eastern Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and to Maine. He'll mention a town, like, I know that town, I know where this is, I know exactly where that is. He'll talk about how he stole this gentleman's horses or how he did this. And he was even interacting with some of our founding fathers. In fact, at the time, Samuel Adams was the governor of Massachusetts, and he actually pardoned him. Tufts was supposed to be hung, and Sam Adams went ahead and commuted his hanging to life in prison, which he later escaped from. I think he escaped from prison numerous times, maybe 10 to 15 times. So really great. This is a really interesting book. But again, I'm bringing it up because it did talk about some of the trapping that the Native Americans are doing right along this riverine corridor. So I thought it was really interesting that we have kind of a firsthand primary source talking about these groups that were going up and down and still doing largely the same things, the same activities they had been doing before contact, which to some extent correlates with what we found out there. So before I open up the presentation to any questions, I'm sure there are definitely questions out there. I just want to briefly discuss the context, as I mentioned earlier, of our survey work. So, essentially the bigger picture that this work fits into. Really, it's part of a larger effort to focus on the inventory of archaeological deposits on state-owned lands. And this is really a twofold type thing where we're trying to promote greater stewardship and also increase the educational and interpretive opportunities that people that come to the state parks and the forested lands areas come to visit. They come to recreate, they come to hunt, they come to fish, but it's a great opportunity to help share, get them interested in the archaeology and the past in New Hampshire. So really, we're emphasizing on completing state-sponsored archaeological field schools and volunteer-based surveys on the state-owned lands, which really maximizes the department's efforts directed towards teaching archaeological field methods and increasing public awareness by also directly contributing to the inventory and documentation of archaeological deposits on state-owned lands. And the data that we're generating from these studies, it's not only data in the pure sense of learning things about the past, but it's also then being used by the land managers of these state lands for future project planning and other management efforts. And the thing that I like the most about it is it's contributing data that can be used on interpretive signs, that can be placed on trail systems, campsites, or other recreational areas, as well as informing interpretive planning within the park, interpretive programming. It's one thing to go to a museum and see some artifacts and be told about where they're from, what they potentially mean, and just learn about your past that way. But I think it's just so much more powerful when you can see the artifacts at a location where they were actually discovered. So a lot of these artifacts, a lot of the more interesting artifacts or the diagnostic artifacts will end up in display cases, and they'll be on display at state park stores or at forestry centers. So people can actually go to a place wherever they're recreating, hunting, fishing, camping, hiking, and be able to learn a little bit more about the place that they're at and give them a little bit more perspective of how long people have actually been using the same land, enjoying the same land that they're enjoying today. So we're really essentially trying to convey a real power of place and then give them a better perspective on the places that they're enjoying today. And there's a little bit of advertising here at the end of the presentation. If anyone is interested in coming out and doing some archaeology with our program, everyone is welcome. We do have a sign up. We on our website, we put out a flyer. Generally towards the end of winter, beginning of spring, we do have to cap the program at approximately 20 people per session. That's just based on how much equipment we have and how many people we can facilitate at a site area. But certainly if anyone is interested in participating in archaeology, the slide you're looking at right now is just the flyer from last year. We're planning to be in Bear Brook for 4 weeks coming up this next June. So again, thank you all for attending. I'm sure that some of you may have questions about the finds we had at Mollidgewock State Park or some of our other sites, or just in general about the scrap program. And I'd definitely hope to answer them as best I can.
Well, excellent. Thank you for that. So yes, if anyone has any questions, you can send them in the chat to me and I'll ask Mark. While we wait for questions to come in, Mark, I just have a general question. What is your favorite thing you've ever found or learned about the state of New Hampshire?
That's a tough question. Let me think here.
I know it's tough because the state of New Hampshire and what it has is amazing. I say that as a former New Hampshire resident who grew up there. So.
Yeah, I think things that happened more recently stick in my mind more sharply. So I would have to say the feature we found at Pillsbury State Park this past season was pretty amazing from the sheer size of it, also to its contents. The size of it was almost 2 meters wide at the top. It's a typical pit-shaped feature. Beautiful stratigraphy within it. You had the real dark burn layer with all the charcoal. Right above that was a dark kind of organic layer with rather large-sized ceramic sherds in it. Then below the burn layer, you had very white soil from the heat alteration, and below that was a red kind of burn layer below that. And just, it was massive, almost 2 meters across at the top. So just really cool feature to begin with. But then also that was the only location on that site that we found ceramics. Everything else was lithics. So I would say just probably because it's more recent than anything else and really cool, I would say that's probably the coolest thing so far.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So we've had a few questions come in. One is from Richard. What does the term FCR stand for?
Oh, I should have explained that in the presentation. So FCR stands for fire cracked rock. Some people will also use the FAR acronym, which is fire affected rock. Essentially, it's rock that was either put into a fire pit to line it, kind of creating a grate on top of coals where you could cook on. Fire cracked rock also occurs if you take rock, heat it up, put it quickly into a container, like a ceramic container or a basket, a woven container that's holding water to get the water to boil. That's known as stone boiling. Both of those activities will cause the rocks to have some indicators, some thermal shock, if you will. So sometimes they'll just be kind of friable rock. Other times they'll actually be cracked and kind of almost exploded apart. There's definitely different stages of the fire cracked rock, but there are studies that are showing that fire cracked rocks, especially for stone boiling, were used over and over and over again. And the more they're used, the more deteriorated they get.
Okay. We have two questions that are really the same question from Vic and Peter, which is, did you do any test pits across the river near the incoming brook? And would that have been a better occupation area?
So on the other side of the brook, and I can go back to the topo map. The other side of the brook, this side is all wetland. I'm assuming that you guys can see my mouse. So this whole side is very wet, swampy, and then immediately on the other side, this whole side it's very steep going up. So, which is why I was so excited to see that this was the park location, because of the three areas, if you will. The swampy area, really steep, and then relatively flat. This was the best area to look in. The other reason that we wouldn't go over here, even if it wasn't swampy, is that this is privately owned land. So we did not negotiate with the private landowners at all. I probably wouldn't look over here anyway, just because of the landform being wetland and really steep as compared to this. This was the better side of the river if you were pulling around this curve. But one of the other things I failed to say earlier is a lot of times when you have a sharp bend in a river like this, or some very, a large rock or some kind of landform that people can recognize over time, that's another good spot to look, just because that's a very noticeable bend, something that you would recognize year after year if you're coming there seasonally. All right, let's go to at the deep place, if you will. Let's meet at the deep place, at Big Bend there. So that's another clue as to the potential of archaeological deposits being present.
We have another question. I don't know if this probably wouldn't have come up in your excavation, but, you know, maybe previous investigations of the area, were there any fish weirs ever found in that section of the river?
Not that I know of. No.
Okay. Vic are there any meanders of the Androscoggin there? What do you mean by that, Vic?
Usually a river doesn't stay centralized in that channel, it does move. And it sort of goes back to Peter's question, which I had the same one about the opposite shore. The topography reminds me of a lot of the sites in upstate New York, which that one area which is more that he worked on, which is more likely to contain sites, but a lot of times the late archaic sites are up above that swampy area. So I think they may not like fish, but I think they like turtles and fowl a lot more. So I mean, sometimes that's more conducive.
Yeah, so wetlands.
But I wasn't sure if you had meandering there or not, because it is a pretty tight bend.
No, I would say that we didn't see much meandering. I mean, you can see the wetland the river may have been wider and may have spilled into this area more, in which case you might look up here on these higher tops, assuming that the water was higher for both the brook and the larger stream. But I definitely agree with wetlands. A lot of people don't realize that the wetlands actually provide more food resources a lot of times than rivers and lakes. When you think of the just diversity of wildlife and the ease with which a lot of those animals can be caught. I mean, frogs, turtles, and snakes are caught much easier than trying to catch a fish out of the water or things like that. So it's yes, wetlands are definitely a great resource and probably a little undervalued in the current archaeological mindset. But again, you can look on the other side for biggest reason, probably private land. The other reason, immediately adjacent to the river, it's very steep. So you'd have to kind of come way up here, I'd say, look at the hilltops, and it's probably the same up here. We had an expanded view of the topo map.
Okay, we have another question from Naomi. Have you done or do you plan to do any environmental reconstructions of the site, such as the vegetation history, the fluvial history, anything like that?
So we did collect soil samples from the feature, and we will float those, and hopefully we'll get some seeds or something else that will give us a little bit more on the environmental history. As far as doing any kind of like coring of the riverbed or anything like that, or doing soil cores deep to try and determine that way, we don't have plans to do that. We don't have a budget or whatnot to do that, but we certainly are hopeful that the soil samples we collected from within the feature will give us at least some information. We also have some calcine bone, but it's pretty small fragments, so that probably isn't going to give us a species, but it could. So our greatest hope is, other than the fact that we identified the species of the wood that was burned, hopefully we'll get some plant seeds or even maybe pollens.
Okay, well, just so you know, if you do any soil stuff or anything like that, or want to do any reconstructions, just making a pitch for you should contact Dr. Suwana Crowley, who is our former past president of the MAS and everything, because she's Dr. Dirt. She is an expert in reconstructing stuff and figuring out from dirt where you should even be digging. So.
Sure. I actually know her. We worked on a project last year up here. Yep.
Okay, then and everything. So those were the questions we had. Vic, did you have something else?
Yeah, I had, well, two other things now. First, we have Dr. Dirt, and also Naomi, who asked that environmental question, is someone who is knowledgeable in pollen analysis. So there's someone else you might lean on who could do some research for you.
That's good to know.
Yeah, she's highly underutilized since I retired. My other, so it's not really a question. I mean, one reason why I had contacted your office is it was the scrap program, and I'm very willing to make sure that when you have your announcement ready, we'll make sure that the people in the MAS mailing list get it, because we get that inquiry quite a bit, and we don't really have those opportunities in Massachusetts. So.
Sure.
We hope to we'd love to send people north. And one of our former chapter members lives in Laconia. And I keep pushing her to go to you guys because her and the two children are really interested and quite knowledgeable. It's great to have youngsters and I mean by youngsters, people under my age out there. So we really appreciate your talk. This is very encouraging.
Well, like I said, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a great way to help get the word out, and as many presentations as we can give, the better, the more the better. Getting the word out there and getting people interested in archaeology. The more people that are interested, the more people that are going to look out for the resources. So.
Okay, well, perfect. So with that, we're going to end tonight's meeting. We will see everyone here next month. You'll be getting emails about who that speaker will be. And don't forget to sign up for the Digging In lecture series. Again, we have one talk tomorrow, and then they're every other Wednesday at 1:30 through December. So have a wonderful night, everyone. Again, thank you, Mark. And
a little applause for our speaker.
As everyone's muted, so. But, okay.
We're gonna have to get you back, Mark, because I know you have a lot of other really interesting topics.
Yeah, definitely.
So.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you.
Have a good night, everyone. See you next month.
All right.